Welcome to Math for Technology, Mthpt 137. We are working on section 2 in chapter 11. So in this chapter, we are solving quadratic equations. In the first section, we did it by factoring, and that doesn't always work. So you have to have a second method so that you can come up with answers. So the second method that we're going to use is the quadratic formula. This is a pretty common method. It actually, some places in the world actually only teach this method and they don't teach factoring, they don't teach graphing. And the rationale there is that this method actually works no matter what the equation looks like. And so since it is one that works every single time, you don't have to think about, well, does it factor, does it graph, those kind of ideas. The quadratic formula is this formula right here. Now, in its general form, the quadratic equation ax squared plus bx plus c, the a, the b, and the c, it's very important to realize where they're at. So notice that a is always in front of x squared, b is always in front of x, and c is always the constants, or the one without the variable. This is the quadratic formula. It is the opposite of b. Now it's plus or minus, and the reason that is because you have to do it twice. Every quadratic equation has two answers, and so the plus sign is going to give us one answer, and the minus sign is going to give us a second answer. Then it's the square root of that same b that is being squared minus 4 times a times c. Now it is all over 2 times a. It's just not partially over. The entire piece up here in the numerator is divided by 2a. Now there's lots of ways you can go online and find little songs and stuff if you want to help memorize this equation, this formula. So when we go to do this formula, we're going to do it twice. So we're going to do it once with the plus sign and once with the minus sign. Now here are some steps that we will walk through. The first step that we have to make sure is that it's always equal to 0, and that's true whether you are graphing, factoring, or doing the quadratic formula. You always should be equal to 0. We will then identify a, b, and c. We will substitute those values into the quadratic formula, and then we will find two results. And then just like any equation, when you solve it, you should always check your answers. So let me get my pen working. Okay, so our equation on the first one is x squared plus 5x minus 14 equals 0. So the first thing we want to do is make sure it's equal to 0, which it is. Then the second thing is to identify a, b, and c. So a is the number in front of x squared. It is understood that that is a 1. So a equals 1. B is in front of x, so b equals 5. C is the constant. Now, there is an invisible plus sign in front of the 1, so that's a positive 1. There is a plus sign in front of the 5, so it's a positive 5 for B. C has a minus sign, so C is negative 14. Okay, so now we're going to plug this into the formula itself. So the formula, I'm just going to rewrite it so we can see it on the same screen. Opposite of B plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. So we're going to plug in our numbers, and we're just going to do one part at a time. So we'll do the plus sign, and then we'll come back and we'll do the minus sign. So the opposite of b is 5, so the opposite of that would be negative 5, plus square root. Now it's b squared minus 4 times a times c. C is a negative 14. So don't forget that, because that will totally mess up your answer if you actually miss this minus sign there. All over 2 times a, which is 1. So now we're just going to do the math. There's nothing to do with the negative 5. Go ahead and we're going to put the stuff together on the inside. 5 squared is 25. Now when I look at the signs, I look at the signs from the squared over, and I do them all in one chunk. So I have a minus and a positive and a minus. So 2 minuses, a negative times a negative makes a positive, not a positive. So I'm going to make that a plus. And then I do 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times 14 is 56. So I do the signs first so that I don't mix them up. So I do all the signs and then I multiply all the numbers. Then in the denominator, I have 2 times 1, which is 2. So we've done our first step, kind of putting together what we can. Now we do need to continue to put together this under the square root. So 25 plus 56, 66, 76, so that's 81 over the 2. Now sometimes this number under the square root is going to come out as a whole number, which it does in this case. Sometimes it's not, so it's just going to depend on the problem on what you're going to do with it. So in our case, the square root of 81 is a nice number. It's 9. So I have negative 5 plus 9 over 2. So negative 5 plus 9 is 4. 4 over 2 is 2. So one of my answers is 2, and I haven't checked it yet. But I do have to go back and I have to do the second answer now, because remember the formula is plus or minus. So I have to go back and I have to subtract the square root. Now everything up to this point would be the same, because the square root of 81 is still 9. So everything to here is the same. We're just going to change the plus to a minus sign. So I'll go ahead and change the color. So we're going to do it second time. This time we're going to do negative 5 minus 9 over 2. So we're doing it once with the plus, once with the minus. Negative 5 minus 9 is negative 14. Negative 14 over 2 is negative 7. So we have 2 answers, which we should with all quadratics. So we have 2 and negative 7. Now when I say go back and check, like you should do with all of your problems, is you're going to plug it back into the original and see if you get 0. Now you don't have to show this, obviously it's just a matter of making sure it works. So 2 squared plus 5 times 2 minus 14. 2 squared is 4. 5 times 2 is 10. 4 plus 10 is 14. 14 minus 14 is 0. So it checks, it gives me 0. So then I do it again, but with a negative 7. So negative 7 squared is 49. Now, notice I put the negative in parentheses because I want to make sure I square the negative, not just the 7, because it's negative 7 times negative 7. And then I have 5 times negative 7, which is minus 35, and minus the 14. 49 minus 35 is 14. 14 minus 14 is 0. So I'm not going to show this checking method every time, but you should. And the reason that you really should is because it does help you identify if you maybe made a small mistake, like if you were accidentally multiplying 4 times 1 and got 3, or you divided by 2, but you really divided by 3. It's just the small mistakes that it helps you find. So that's where the checking is really important. Okay, so we've done example 1. It's fairly straightforward. Started with 0, and then we plugged it in. If we look at example 2, it is not equal to 0. So that's actually the very first thing that we're going to have to do is make that equal to 0. Now, unfortunately, with this pen that I have, it doesn't stay. So I actually have to erase this to do the second one. But you can always pause the video and then continue. Sorry, it is so slow. I wish it was quicker. Okay. So the first thing we've already identified that we have to do is get it equal to 0. So I tend to move everything to the left-hand side and keep my x squared positive. It doesn't really matter. Just be very careful and keep track of your signs. That's the most important thing. So I'm going to minus the x and minus the 21. And I minus the x because there's an invisible plus sign there. and I minus the 21 because it's a positive and I want to make it go away on this right hand side. So if I do it on the right, I have to come over and do it on the left. So my equation becomes 2x squared minus x minus 21 equals 0. Now once I've done that, I can go ahead and identify a, b, and c. So a is 2, because that's what's in front of x squared. B is a negative, and there's an invisible number there. It's always understood to be a 1 if there's no number written. And then C is my negative 21 because it's the constant. Now I still can see up here the equation, so I'm going to go ahead and use that. We're going to plug into it. I'm just going to do the plus first. So the opposite of B, now B is a negative number, so the opposite of a negative is a positive, so that's going to turn it into a positive 1 instead of a negative 1, plus the square root. Now again, my B is originally negative, so when I go to square it, I want to make sure I square the negative with it, not just the 1. So I'm going to put it in parentheses. If you're not like, when do I put in parentheses and when I don't, you can just always put it in parentheses and then you don't have to worry about it. But for sure, you have to do it when it's a negative. Minus 4 times my A is 2 times my C, which is a negative 21. All over 2 times A, which is 2. So now we'll go ahead and just start simplifying. 1 plus square root. Negative 1 squared is 1. I'm going to check my signs. I have a negative times a positive, which is a negative. Negative times a negative, which is a positive. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 21 is 168. And then in the denominator, we have 2 times 2, or 4. So go ahead and put together the stuff on the inside of the square root. 1 plus 168 is 169 over 4. This again is a nice number. It's 1 plus 13. 1 plus 13 is 14. 14 over 4. Now it's not a whole number, which is fine. It's 7 over 2 if you divide both of them by 2. You can leave it as a fraction like this. You can turn it into a decimal, which would be 3.5. I honestly don't care. Now, you may have to do it a particularly way in WebAssign, so just pay attention to what it tells you to put in for your answer. If you're struggling with that part, just let me know and I can email you back what it's wanting. Now that's the first answer. Now we have to do it again. We did it with the plus, so now we have to do it again with the minus. So x equals, now again, all of this math here stays the same, all the way to here. So actually I'm going to slide over. My picture's a little bit in the way, so I guess I won't slide over. So it's 1 minus 13 over 4. But everything else stayed the same. So I'm just going to go back to right here and just change the plus to a minus. 1 minus 13 is negative 12. I'm still dividing that by the denominator, which in this case is 4. Negative 12 over 4 is negative 3. So I have one answer of negative 3, one answer of 3.5. Now again, I'm going to go ahead and check that. This time I'm just going to go ahead and do it on my calculator. And what I'm going to do is I'm still going to, well, let's go ahead and plug it into the first one just to show what that looks like if you want to put it in there. So what it would do is my first answer is 3.5. So I'd go 2 times 3.5 squared. And I want to see, is that equal to 3.5 plus 21? Well, 3.5 squared is 12.25. 12.25 times 2 is 24.5. 3.5 plus 21 is 24.5. So they are the same thing, so they are equal. So this one works. Just do it again. We do it with negative 3. 2 times negative 3 squared. Is that equal to negative 3 plus 21. So negative 3 squared is 9. 9 times 2 is 18. And negative 3 plus 21 is 18, so it does also check. So those are my two answers, negative 3 and 3.5. Okay, so it doesn't matter if you do it with it equal to 0 or if you do it prior to being equal to 0. You still want to make sure that the left-hand side is equal to the right-hand side. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at, we have two more examples to look at, and this time it stayed, which was really nice. Okay, so this time we have 3x squared plus x minus 5 equals 0. It's already equal to 0, so we're just going to go ahead and identify the a, the b, and the c. So a should be 3, b should be 1, c should be negative 5. We're going to plug that in to our quadratic formula, which I'm going to rewrite just so it's on the same page. And if I'm doing a bunch of homework, I would have this sitting like at the top of, like on a notebook page or the top of the note page, or maybe on an index card that I always just have sitting there so I can always refer back to it. You will eventually memorize it. It just will come natural from doing it over and over again. Okay, so opposite of b. B is a positive 1, so the opposite makes it a negative 1. Just doing the plus sign right now. So I'm squaring 1. Sorry, that's a bad square. Minus 4 times my a, which is 3, times my c, which is negative 5. And this is all being divided by 2 times a, which is 3 in our case. So negative 1 plus 1 squared is 1. Negative times positive is a negative. Negative times a negative is a positive. 4 times 3 is 12. 12 times 5 is 60. 2 times 3 is 6. Now, what's going to be a little bit different about this one is the 1 plus 60 is 61. And 61 does not have a beautiful square root. If I square root 61, it's 7.8 blah, 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 blah. And so there's two ways that you can write your answer. And again, we're going to have to look at WebAssign and say, okay, what is it asking us for our answers? If it wants it in exact form, this is the exact form. Because square root of 61 is not, I can't get a nice number out of it. It's a number that continues on. So in exact form, that's what I would put down for my answer. Now, the nice thing about exact form is when you go to do the opposite, the only thing, again, that's changing is this plus is becoming a minus. So it would be negative 1 minus the square root of 61 all over 6. So the second answer in exact form is identical except for that minus sign. Now, if it says, okay, let's change it to 3 significant digits. Now, significant digits is a prior math skill that is expected before you take 137. If that is a skill that you do not have, let me know that and I can give you information so that you can do that part. So what we're going to do is we're going to just plug this into our calculator and turn it into a decimal if it's asking for significant digits. So we know the square root of 61 is 7 point something. So then we're going to add a negative 1 to that. And then we're going to divide it by 6. And so that is approximately 1.14. Now that's the top one. Now I'm going to do it again on the bottom one. So negative 1 minus the square root of 61 divided by 6 is approximately negative 1.47. So these would be the two answers if it said round your answer to 3 significant digits. Okay, so it's going to just have to look and read what the directions are asking. Now the discriminant, just so you know, b squared minus 4ac is the discriminant. That is going to become important as we move on, especially as we get into the 5th section of this chapter. And so it's just kind of a point of reference right now. You don't have to memorize it. We'll use it later on. Now there is one more question, and the reason that I wanted to do one more, we've got exact answers, we've got non-exact answers. This one, notice, is missing a term. I have a squared term and I have a constant, but I don't have that plain x term. And so I wanted to make sure you would know what to do when that happens. If you have a missing term, then you place a 0 in that position. And the reason that is it's saying there are 0 x's there. So what you can kind of think of it as is it's saying 3x squared plus 0x minus 75 equals 0. And it's because there's no x's. Now it's not a 1, because if it was a 1, it would be there. Like in example 3, this is a 1 because the x is written there. Because the x is missing, that means there are none of them. There are 0 of them. Now, other than that, you do it exactly the same. So I'm not going to waste your time and do the entire problem. Well, maybe I will do the entire problem just so you can see the difference. B equals 0. C equals negative 75. If you think you have it, you can always just stop the video and keep going. Get started on your assignment. So notice that my A is 3, my B is 0, my C is negative 75. Now I'm still going to just plug into the formula. So x equals the opposite of B. Since B is 0, 0 is neutral. There's no opposite of it, so it's just going to stay 0. Plus square root. B squared would be 0 squared minus 4 times A times negative 75. This is all being divided by 2 times A. 0 is still 0. 0 squared is still 0. Now I have a negative times a positive, which is a negative. Negative times a negative is a positive. 4 times 3 is 12. 12 times 75 is 900. All over 2 times 3, which is 6. Still have a 0. 0 plus 900 is 900. Now, square root of 900, I think, is a nice number. Yep, it's 30. So 0 plus, that's very ugly. Let's try that again. So you can actually read it. 0 plus 30 divided by 6. 0 plus 30 is 30. 30 divided by 6 is 5. So one of my answers is 5. The second answer, remember, all we're doing is changing the plus to a minus. So my second answer is going to be 0 minus 30 over 6. The 0 minus 30 is negative 30. Negative 30 over 6 is negative 5. And again, I can check those answers just to make sure they're correct. Okay, so that's using the quadratic formula. Practice it in your assignment. If you get stuck, let me know, and I'll be back with a video for applications. Have a good day.